We're going to have to think about changing the HRA time.
Yeah.
We're going to have to probably go back to doing it after our meetings, even though that'll really extend them. At least it's just not right to get three of us here acting on these things that are important.
At least on the 10th and 11th. That seems like that's, or is it the 9th and 10th? Yeah, because that's a night and then followed by a 7:30.
Okay, oh yeah, we got a green light. Everybody ready to go? All right, no gavel. Not that it's not critical, but I can use Ron's water bottle.
It's Rock Creek, but still.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the August 26th meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority. This meeting is being held both in person and electronically. All available members of the HRA, some staff, and presenters are participating from the council chambers. Others are participating from their homes or offices. Before we begin, there's a few things that we'd like to cover. Today, community comment will be the only opportunity during the meeting for members of the public to participate. You're allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes about anything that is not on today's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. If you want to call in for community comment, call 800-374-0221. Community comment, 800-374-0221. The conference ID is 803-8358, 803-8358. Individuals in the room here at council chambers will be invited to come forward to speak first. Then we'll hear from any of those that have called in to speak on a particular matter in community comment. Again, a reminder, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak. For those in the room, the red light at your podium will turn on when you're out of time. Executive Assistant Jennifer Garski will let anyone who calls in know if they go over the 3 minutes. We ask that individuals do not repeat information already presented. Call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward. So thanks in advance for your patience as we work to conduct this meeting in a hybrid format. We hope there will not be any issues, but be assured that we will do our best to continue the meeting as well as we can if there are any technological difficulties. All right, so now let's call the meeting to order and roll call, please, Ms. Garski.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Commissioner Jackson?
Here.
Commissioner Pierce? Commissioner Staunton? Chair Hovland?
Here. Next matter is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this morning. And is there anyone who wishes to modify the meeting agenda in any form or fashion? And Executive Director Neal, anything to modify?
No changes from staff.
All right, very good. Is there a motion to approve the meeting agenda as published?
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to approve the meeting agenda as published. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And now we're on to community comment. Are there any residents in the audience who would like to speak about something that's not on the agenda this morning or scheduled for a future public hearing? Yes. Sequentially, Bill, is this when you wanted Megan to come forward, or did you want to make her part of the presentation on the theater?
I think this is most appropriate at this point.
All right, very good. Good morning.
Good morning, council members. My name is Megan Feeney, and I live in the Morningside neighborhood at 4239 Grimes Avenue South. I'm here this morning to follow up on a letter that Bill sent to you all yesterday about the Edina Cinema. In short, I'm here to advocate for not just its survival, but its revitalization into the civic asset that I think it wants to be. I believe that every penny the city spends on it will accrue to Edina's immediate and long-term benefits, but only if the cinema is trusted to the right operator, which your decisions about city funding can influence. I'm concerned that the cinema cannot reach its full potential with a for-profit exhibitor. In fact, I'm worried that a for-profit exhibitor is likely to fail, which would deal the cinema a fatal blow. I think people would lose patience and we would lose that cinema. I don't know how much you know about the exhibition business, but it's been in dire straits for many years, even prior to COVID, and I don't have time here to go into the ins and outs of changing production and distribution practices, but suffice it to say here that industry prognosticators are pessimistic to apoplectic, extremely pessimistic about the for-profit exhibition business. On the other hand, and in response to this, communities around the country have been saving their shuttered or near shuttered movie theaters with for-profit or nonprofit organizations. On the letter that I sent you yesterday, I included a lot of super exciting, inspiring examples from very similar markets to Edina around the country. So please take a look at that if you want to get excited about the potential that that cinema has for the city of Edina. They've really transformed these theaters into vital community centers and hubs, and they drive a lot of foot traffic and revitalize the business districts that they are in. There's no official count that I can find, but the National Association of Theater Owners told me that they have 75 to 100 members of these nonprofit operators around the United States, and that it's a growing space. The nonprofit model has many advantages. First, it opens up life-saving revenue streams beyond ticket sales and popcorn. In other nonprofit cinemas, as much as 60% of revenues are through these contributions, including grants, donations, sponsorships, memberships, and you can offset staff costs through volunteers. Secondly, a local nonprofit has greater flexibility to adapt to local tastes and needs and to build community partnerships with local restaurants, with the schools, with businesses. A local nonprofit can offer community, not just content. So we're not just competing with the streaming services. That's why I'm so excited that a venerable nonprofit organization, the Minneapolis Film Society, the Minneapolis-St. Paul Film Society, is interested in leasing that space. I think Edina should do everything it can to roll out the red carpet for the Minneapolis Film Society, which is Minnesota's premier film organization and home of the very popular Minneapolis-St. Paul Film Festival. Annually, just very quickly, they bring in 85,000 patrons, 50,000 in its film festival in April, and at the Edina Cinema, there's room for them to grow because right now they just lease one screen year-round at St. Anthony, Maine, but they would have 4 screens at the Edina Cinema, and then again, that amazing film festival that they have. They already have a roster of loyal donors, sponsors, and members with a lot of room to grow in Edina and the Southwest Metro. Along with the grants that they have a lot of experience getting, these contributions cover 55% of their expenses. And I know I'm out of time, but take a look, if you can, at the Minneapolis Film Society's webpage to see all the programming that they have that attracts diverse audiences and appeals to, would have great appeal in Edina. They also have a lot of relationships with distributors that are established so they can bring back the kind of content that Landmark had at that cinema and for which they built a very reliable audience. That said, moving to the Edina Cinema would entail a significant cost increase to the Minneapolis Film Society to their current operating costs. And, as you probably all know, the cinema requires some improvements to help the Film Society achieve that cinema's full potential. Thus, city funding is necessary for talks to proceed between the owner and the Minneapolis Film Society, which is why I'm here today asking you to consider investing in this win-win proposition for the future. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to furthering this conversation.
All right, thanks, Ms. Feeney. Ms. Feeney, is your contact information in case any of the HRA or council members wish to contact you?
Yeah, I
Is it in
can.
your letter, in your
It's,
correspondence?
yes, well, I'm CC'd on the letter, so I can be reached by email, but I can also send my phone number.
All right, and then
Through
why
Bill.
don't you give folks a little bit about your background, too?
Oh, okay, so I am a Edina resident. I'm also a film historian with a PhD in American Studies. I've taught film at the University of Minnesota and at St. Olaf. Currently, I'm working as a film critic.
All right. And did you give your address, your home address at the
I
beginning?
did, but
All
I can
right,
do it
very good.
again. Oh, okay, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Morningside
All
area.
right, okay. Thanks for your interest in this and the work you've done so far.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It's a vexing little problem that we all care deeply about. So, thank you.
A problem and an opportunity.
All right, there you go. All right, anyone else in chambers this morning that wishes to speak to the council about a matter of concern to them? For those that were listening in, potentially, the call-in number is 800-374-0221, just a reminder. Conference ID 803-8358, 803-8358. You can see it on the screen before you. An operator will ask for your name and street address. You'll get in the queue by pressing *1, and you'll be given 3 minutes to speak. Director Benarott, do we have anybody on the line?
We do not have anyone on the line at this time. Because it's early, though, I do recommend we wait a minute or so before moving on. As there is a slight delay in the broadcast, I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to get in. My clock shows that it's 7:45, so I will just turn to 7:46. So when it's 7:47 or a speaker, I will come back to you.
All right, good. We'll wait for a cue from you.
It is now 7:47, and I don't have any callers on the line, so I think it's safe to move forward with the agenda.
Good, we'll move on. I don't think, Director Neal, there were any comments you needed to follow up on from the last HRA meeting? All right, very good. Next item is the consent agenda. There are 3 items on the consent agenda. Is there any commissioner that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? And if not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda as shown.
So moved.
Second?
Got a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda in a single motion. Those items on the consent agenda. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the consent agenda and the 3 items contained therein in a single motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now we're on to reports and recommendations. That portion of the agenda, we've got about a half a dozen things to cover there this morning. And the first matter is the potential terms of a tax increment financing term sheet. And Manager Neuendorf has this matter. And we've got some of our experts here to assist us here in this discussion as well. So I want to thank folks for being here with us this evening, or this morning. So it's 4917 Eden Avenue, potential terms of a tax increment financing arrangement.
Good morning.
Morning, Manager Neuendorf.
Yes, our first item this morning is regarding a staff recommendation for the terms for tax increment financing for the project located at 4917 Eden Avenue. This discussion is one of 3 or 4 items on the agenda this morning, so it's a pretty full agenda, so I'll run through it quickly. But of course, when I'm finished with the presentation, I'll be available for questions. This morning, the city is also joined by Nick Anhut from Ehlers & Associates, Jay Lindgren from Dorsey and Whitney. They're the city's financials and legal advisors. Also this morning, Nick Walton and Jared Ackman from Reuter Walton Developers are here with us. And this group has been meeting along with other city staff for the last couple months to work on this project to see if we can put together business terms that make the most sense, thank you, for this project. So my presentation this morning, I'll break it into 3 or 4 parts. Generally run through the background, I'll do that briefly, summarize the developer's financing request, run through the staff evaluation, and then finally walk through our recommendation that's outlined in your packet this morning. So the project, as we know, is located just kitty corner from City Hall. It's a 2-acre site, currently an older restaurant built in the early 1970s. This site is one of many throughout Edina's commercial districts where the land value exceeds the value of the building. And that's usually where redevelopment occurs in Edina and areas like Edina. The project, I think we're all familiar with as a city council. You've gone through the zoning and through the site planning on this. So I've got some images if that's helpful, but it's a single building that's mixed use. It has just under 200 apartment units. It has about a 3,000 square foot restaurant on the first floor. The site is completely upgraded with sidewalks, public plazas, some public parking, and then it's also arranged in a way where the city can acquire a portion of that land for a future roadway improvement. One of the biggest conversations about this entire project has been how the site can best fit into the neighborhood and what type of transportation improvements might be made possible with financing generated from this site. So over the last few months, our engineering department has been preparing some concepts about some of those improvements that would connect this site to the neighborhood, connect the neighborhood to the site, provide better connections to the school to the south, as well as better easterly and westerly connections. So we've discussed this with this group, I think that was last month. But that's one of the most exciting things about this whole proposal is with this project, with the scale and the quality that the developer proposes to build, there's enough revenue to pay for most of these improvements. Right now, these improvements are not even in our CIP because there was never a funding source. Now we think we might have that funding source. So in order to make this overall project and the scale of redevelopment possible, the developer has requested $5.1 million spread out over 15 years. Staff, as well as Ehlers and Dorsey, has reviewed that request. We've gone through the financials. We've looked at the pro formas, compared it with what else is happening in the Twin Cities and what's happening in real estate development in general. And we can confirm that there is a significant budget gap in their project. It's a very expensive project to build, but it delivers a lot of benefits. We recommend that gap can be filled, the pro forma can be made whole through a combination of both tax increment financing as well as pursuit of grants from Met Council and Deed. Both of those funders offer grants. They're competitive. You never know if you're going to get them. But between TIF and those other grants, we think we can fill that gap and make this project possible. We've discussed TIF as a whole before. Once you start putting some of these numbers to these graphs, the current value of the property, the market value, as determined by the assessor, which isn't always what the private market sees for the property, is currently at about $3 million. When this project is finished, it's expected to be assessed at between 50 and 60 million. So that's a massive leap in the overall assessment. So as we look at this project, we recognize that this amount of growth, I mean, we're looking at over 1,800% growth. It's not doubling, it's not tripling, it's not by a factor of 10, by a factor of almost 20 would be the growth. A simple remodel of the building, a replacement with a simple commercial building, a Walgreens, a pharmacy, a drive-through, something like that, would not have results anywhere close to this. And obviously at this scale, you get that tremendous boost. But the boost doesn't happen if the project isn't viable, and thus that's where TIF comes in. So as we've looked at the financial performance, we've also reassessed the project to better understand not just the developer's need, but the public's need, and looking at the public benefits there. So there's a few benefits that are expected, I'll say. You know, obviously it's a high quality construction. Mixed uses, something that we're striving for in the Grandview district, not just all residential or all commercial, but mixes that are blended together. We've got the massive increase in the property tax base, but that's pretty much expected. But the project delivers a lot of other benefits that are really noteworthy. Right now, there's no stormwater strategy at all on the property. When it's rebuilt, the property would implement all modern stormwater requirements, which would actually help not just the site, but the neighbors, the neighboring properties, as well as the creek. Right now, everything just runs into the creek. We would change that and make it more modern. The site would be enhanced with all new public sidewalks, public streetscaping, public plaza, including some public artwork. It would also include affordable housing. There'd be 10% of the units, or about 20 units, would be made affordable for at least a 20-year period. We'd also deliver public parking. The surface parking lot there would be made available to the general public, whether they're visiting the restaurant, whether they're visiting guests, whether they're visiting the buildings over at Chupa Park across the street. But I think most importantly for the site is the fact that the developer has arranged the site to deliver the western edge. It's currently a green space, but that would be made available to the city for a future public use for a transportation project, and that would be the relocation of that Highway 100 off-ramp. So that's just a little bit over 10,000 square feet. But then the bigger benefit for the general community is the enabling of this financing for all these other roadway improvements. And that's, again, something that was deemed very important when it went through the zoning process. So I'll run briefly through some of the financing that we looked at. This shows the sources and uses for the project. As I mentioned, it's a very expensive project. It's very ambitious. It's about $84 million as the total budget. The land cost is $12 million. The actual construction hard cost is about $56. The soft costs are about $15. Working with Ellers, we found that their line items appear generally reasonable and within the reasonable range. The developer fee is reasonable. The financing cost is reasonable. The budgetary costs look pretty normal for most projects of this scale. The only thing that's a little bit unusual is the land price. It is a high price for the land. But it's also a property where talking with the owner and talking with the broker, it's, in their opinion, 100% location. And it's not a site that was readily available. It was not listed for sale. So they did approach the owner to acquire it. This chart shows recent land acquisitions. It's not a true real estate appraisal. It's a very simplistic approach, but just comparing what property sold for in Edina and then also some similar sites in the city of Minneapolis. And these dates or these projects go back about 5 years. So they're recent for Edina, but to an appraiser, they would not be that recent. So this project is the big dot on the far right side of the graph. And it is a higher cost site. It's on par with the Nolan Mains project. It's a little bit less expensive than that Lorient project over at 44th in France. That particular project had a high per unit cost because it was a smaller project, so your unit cost is going to be higher. But that being said, while the land price is high, it's still within that general normal range. It's just on the high end of the range. We also looked at some of the TIF eligible costs, and this is always a topic of fierce conversation between the city and the developers. Minnesota statute recognizes a wide variety of costs that could be paid with TIF or could be reimbursed with TIF. The City of Edina policy looks at a much narrower scope when it comes to using TIF. So in this project, there's easily over $25 million that are recognized by statute as TIF eligible. After reviewing the numbers, after looking at the public benefit, it's staff's recommendation that we meet that need, the $5.1 million. We do not recommend we go any higher than that. It's just not necessary, not warranted. We also looked at the operating pro forma, so the financials of the project after it's finished and when it's opened. We look at the annual income, we look at the annual expenses, make adjustments in order to get that net operating income into a percentage that satisfies the market. So if you look at the bottom, if you look at the numbers on the bottom, in the first year, it's they're half leased, they're still getting up and running, but at that point the returns on the project are about 3.5%. Typically, market likes to be between 6 and 8%. With this project, if it's well stabilized in the second year, without TIF, they would see a market return of about 5.5%, which is outside of that range. They would not be able to get equity. They won't be able to get the debt for the project either. So using tax increment, we could boost that return to the minimum level, reaching 6%. Most developers like between 6 and 8. We're willing to get them to 6. That should be sufficient to get the project rolling. And that means that the gap annually is about $456,000. The project will easily generate that. So there's no question about it being possible. So with that in mind, we've got a set of recommended terms. These are outlined in the staff report a couple weeks ago, but we fine-tuned them and gotten in a little bit more detail in the term sheet that's in your packet. Again, recommending that we pledge $5.1 million in a TIF note that's paid out over 15 years. We'd create a 26-year district, and the revenue that's collected in years 16 through 26 would help pay for all those roadway improvements, as well as some of the revenue in those early years would also do that. So the TIF note is pretty standard. It's what we prefer to do in Edina is issue a note. The note is issued and made payable after the project is completed. And the reason that Edina prefers to do it that way is that it keeps the financial risk with the developer. The city is not at risk at all. And in a way, the developer is rewarded only after he's successful, after he gets the project delivered. We have a series of safeguards built into the term sheet as well to make sure that we do not over-reimburse the project. So we're writing it up as an amount not to exceed $5.1 million. If some of the construction costs come down, it might actually be less than $5 million. We'd also be looking at resizing the TIF note once the project is stabilized. So hopefully in that second year, sometimes it might stretch to the third year, but that way it's an initial look to make sure that the amount of tax increment that's provided to the developer is strictly what they need. And then of course the city always has typical look back or clawback provisions to make sure that at the end of the project we've not over subsidized the deal. There's a number of public benefits. I walked through them at a high level. I'll just run through them here. I've got a little bit more detail. We've got the streetscapes and the public plaza. We've also negotiated that the developer agree to provide a future easement in case Metro Transit does a bus stop or like a mass transit type of amenity there, to make sure that we've got space to do something like that in the future. At this point, there is no immediate plan, but plans change over 20, 30 years. We've also negotiated to have a public easement put on that surface parking lot. And then most importantly for this site is the dedication of the land for the future off-ramp, for the future public road improvement. Affordable housing is also a huge benefit of this project, and also something that contributes to its financial gap. The developer is going to be providing units that are, the rent will be far reduced from the rest of the rents in the building. That has a pretty impactful outcome to his revenue. But he's willing to provide the units. They're excited to provide the units. It's something that they believe in. So we'll make sure that we'll have those in there. Something new is including equity goals in the TIF contract. This is something I've done in other cities in the past, but this is the first time we're actually, we'll do it here in Edina. But we'll have language in the contract to assure that a portion of the construction work and design work is awarded to companies that are minority-owned businesses or women-owned businesses. We'll also require that a portion of the actual jobs that are filled on the project are filled by people of color and by women, two groups that are highly underrepresented in the field. There's good guidance from the State Department of Human Rights to provide some guidance there. And with these requirements, we will require that a good faith effort be made. It's difficult to mandate this and to penalize if they don't hit that target, but the developer has very willingly agreed to make best efforts to do so, and we think that's something that we should definitely include. And then the biggest part of this project, even bigger than the developer's site, are these off-site roadway improvements. This is a slate of projects valued between $6 to $8 million. Sidewalks, new intersections, improved turning, improved safety off of 50th Street. We think we can make the vast majority of those possible with funds generated from this completed project. So in summary, the staff recommendation is to begin work on creating a 26-year redevelopment TIF district, be prepared to issue a single note to the developer when he's finished with the project, prepare for that roadway improvement. It'll take some time, probably a couple years, to get all the engineering worked out for that, but we recommend that we start going down that road. And ultimately this morning what we're seeking is approval of that term sheet and authorization for staff and our legal counsel to proceed and get a full contract together for you in the next couple months to actually get approvals there. So with that, that's the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. As I mentioned, the city's representatives are here with us this morning, as well as the developer, and we will, of course, all be available for your questions.
All right, very thorough presentation, Mr. Nuendorf. Thank you. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I do have some questions, and you've probably heard similar questions from me in the past, Mr. Nuendorf. Number one, under public benefits, we talk about 29 parking stalls as a public benefit, but my working assumption is, and I think you mentioned it in your presentation, which was, I agree with the chair, very thorough. Thank you. These parking stalls are primarily for use at the project. They're really to park restaurant patrons. They're there for guest parking. And I think that those are typical expenses that are going to be accrued with any given project of this nature, or even somewhat smaller. So I'm just wondering, I don't really expect an answer from you this morning, but the question that I have is, should those be publicly funded? Should that type of parking be publicly funded? And I guess I'm not certain that I would agree with that. Reimbursable costs, I've brought this forward in the past as well. The demolition of an existing building is part of the process of the development. And while there are public realm benefits to be found in terms of stormwater handling, but I think that the demolition of the building really is a developer expense, and it's bothersome, I think, at least to me, that we are reimbursing for what is a direct cost associated with that type of building. If we were taking down a single family, it would be an expense of the developer. If it were a smaller building, it would be the expense of the developer. So that's kind of where I am with that. The land donation is a question mark, because we know that will happen at some point in the future. This is a ramp from 100 that's going to go right through there. Right now, the owner of the site has that. And, the question that would come up for me, which I can also answer, is why can't we separate that out and leave that to the future when MnDOT decides to make a decision on bringing that through? And of course, we can't, because it's all sold as one parcel. But I believe that the extraordinarily high land cost is, as you mentioned, a function of the market, yes, and it's not on the market and not available. But I strongly believe that the rezoning of the site, which allows that number of units to be built there, creates value. It creates value in the site. So one of the things that we're doing here is reimbursing the developer for acquiring the site that we create part of the value with. And that's troubling to me, that we pump up the site cost, and we're participating in buying some of it back at the cost that we create. Correct me any place that you think that I'm moving a little too far off, but I don't see that reflected anywhere, the value of the rezoning and the potential for the development site. You mentioned this morning, and you mentioned 2 weeks ago, that part of the request on the part of the developer was due to the land cost, which is very high, and as well as the extremely high cost of materials at this time. So that's really a developer timing decision. When you build, that's up to the developer. It's really not up to the city, but we're asked to consider that and participate in that, and again, it's a developer decision. So just so it clarify for me, if I'm off here, the structure of the TIF assistance would be to issue a TIF note to the developer for $5.1 million. And then the TIF district would ultimately yield about approximately $11.4 million, I think, correct?
That's all right.
The future infrastructure and traffic improvements, and they would might begin in roughly 5 years.
Correct.
Thank you. Has there been any consideration as to the boundaries of the TIF district, where that falls? Would it be the project only?
There's been a lot of consideration of that, yes. The TIF district, we don't have that prepared yet. We're asking for your authorization later today. But it would probably include the parcel, the Perkins parcel. We'd probably include the park across the street. And then we would include the roadways that immediately serve this area. So it's some of our old TIF districts, like when it's only for a project, you just include that parcel. But in this case, where we know that we want some roadway improvements, we want to make sure that we include those roadways. There is a legal test. You cannot include every roadway in town. But the ones that immediately serve and make this project accessible could be included. So we don't have a map yet, but in the next couple of weeks, with your authorization, we will have one for you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to wait roughly 5 years to begin construction on the roadway improvements. But what we find and what we've heard in the past is that the neighborhood is immediately impacted, not so much by construction, but at the end of construction with the additional traffic. And we've also got the potential of considerable construction almost directly across the street at the public works site. So I look at that and I think, well, okay, but we're still not really solving or even addressing the traffic issues, the access and egress issues in the Sunny Slope neighborhood, which we've heard a lot about. I do think that there can be some relief in the areas that we're discussing in terms of the improvements. I don't know that it's going to make the big difference that they are seeking and that expresses their concerns. So on the road improvements, we need them. We almost have to have them. They're overdue, but it's a source of concern for me and frustration, really, that we have to tie that to a TIF note on this particular project. And I don't know that there's a good workaround, and we have experts in the room. They may be able to comment on that. But is there any reason that we couldn't bond those improvements and begin immediate construction and then consider tax abatement to reimburse the developer for their real public realm benefits? And they're numerous in this project or any version of it or any future project. And I just wonder if that's a workaround that we can consider, because then that way we can maybe determine what is the true public realm benefit and consider how to reimburse the developer for that.
If I
That's
can
all I
respond to the 5 years. So the roadway improvements, it'll be a little dance. Engineer Milner walked through some of the other projects that are coming up in the next few years. With TIF financing, you've got to make your financing commitment within 5 years. So that's the outside window. It could not happen. Well, if it happens after 5 years, we lose our funding. So that's the absolute deadline to get contracts built or bid and awarded and start construction. We think we can probably do that more quickly, but there definitely is a dance. We've got the county rebuilding the bridges on the west side of the highway. We've got an off-ramp being closed on Eden. We've got construction traffic and just regular traffic shifting for those two road closures. So if we can't rebuild every road at the same time, which would shut down everything. So there will definitely be the need for a lot of coordination to make sure that the public can still get through, can get to the highway, over the highway, et cetera. So that's why I put in an outside window of 5 years, because I'm not familiar with the schedule of each individual project, but we definitely want to make sure that we're diligent about coordinating those construction projects. If we bonded today and started construct, we could start design this winter, maybe get it bid by next fall, and then construction in 2023. That's right when Vernon Avenue, the bridge is shut down. So now you've basically closed down the whole intersection, the whole interchange. So we need a little bit of wiggle room to make sure that we can still let people get through.
I see what you're saying. Thank you.
Commissioner Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have two questions. I think Commissioner Anderson raised this with the demolition costs and the site preparation. I have to say, my question was, can we articulate what the public benefit is for that? It seems like that is a private benefit as part of any reconstruction project. And I wondered if you could tell us how we translate that. So when we talk to the public, we can say, well, this is why, and it's not just but for, but if you could talk a little bit about why that's considered to be a public benefit.
Sure. I include demolition and soil remediation or environmental remediation as a benefit to the public. The demolition is a cost to build in Edina. The big challenge there is the developer could pick a lot of other sites to build their project. Demographics are different, site conditions are different, but there's greenfield sites available in the West Metro that are available at a lower price with no demolition required, doesn't have to clean up goo that's been in the soil for 50 years. So those are really extraordinary costs, which is one of the reasons TIF was first invented, was to level the playing field and provide reimbursement for some of those costs that a different site would not incur. So the public benefit is more subjective on that demo or on the demolition. But in order to level the playing field and make sure that Edina gets projects, I mean, we're a great location, great community, but when it comes to development investment, there's lots of different options. I want to make sure that Edina is on the top of folks' list. So that's how I get to the demolition. And with the soil contamination and environmental contamination, we don't want stuff in our water. We don't want stuff in our soil. Whether you live on the site, next door to the site, if you have any access to water in the creek, you don't want that stuff down in your water. But we have drinking wells, pumping stations in town. If we can clean up that contamination, it's better to do it sooner than later. So to me, that's every time I turn on my tap of drinking water, that's public benefit.
Okay, great. So I just want to make some comments on that. So the first thing is, like, I can hear the emails coming in already saying, well, here we are actively encouraging development when traffic is going up and all the concerns that people have. But I want to take it a step further than that and look at the long term and the economic benefits that if we don't have redevelopment in the city and what I would call infill, then you're going to be pushing development out further. And that development is going to need to drive through Edina, pass through to get to the rest of the Twin Cities. And so we get the burdens of people passing through on our highways and pushing people out to our east-west streets primarily, but without any of the tax benefit or the economic benefit. So the development will happen, and other communities would get the economic benefit of it, but we would still be burdened by the additional population coming into the Twin Cities, because Edina is really at the crossroads of getting into the Twin Cities, whether it's on 494, which isn't technically in Edina, but it pushes traffic onto the crosstown and onto our streets. So I want to just make that case, because it is upsetting to look at demolition costs and soil remediation. I mean, that just jumped out at me on your sheet. But I want to make that case that, it's bringing infill, which is a good thing. It keeps our city alive and thriving and benefiting, and not pushing it out, making traffic problems, compounding our existing traffic problems. The other question I had, and I think you may have answered this, is that we're looking at 26 years. The first 15 would go towards the actual costs in this TIF note that we're talking about. But then additionally, we have $11.4 million available for these traffic remediation things, and you're looking at about $6 to $8 million in actual costs. Is that correct?
That's roughly correct, yes.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we're at this point, it's all estimated.
Right.
But so what we're talking about today is the note with the developer for this, but then there would be additional increment available, which would kind of kick in after we've paid off that $5.1 million. Is that correct?
That's correct. And for the first 15 years, the payments on the note will probably only use 60 to 70% of the dollars that are coming in. So even starting in year one, we'd still have some payment available for those public roads.
Okay.
We won't know that exact amount until the project is finished and fully assessed and occupied, et cetera. But we think there'd be at least 30% of the dollars in the early years made available to the city for those public roadways.
Okay, terrific, thank you. And then to Commissioner Anderson's point about the parking things, I know I've been to events here at City Hall where there's spillover parking. And I would like to see some sort of signage here at City Hall saying, if the parking lot is full, please feel free to use the parking lot across the street. Because I know Perkins has signs all over the place, private parking for Perkins only, and it's empty. And here we've got, a parking lot at City Hall absolutely packed. There's no place to park. And, hopefully because it's for a joyful reason, not in protest. But I have seen this building full and the parking lot full. And so I would hope that would come with some signage to please consider that as spillover parking for City Hall, which is really needed. So I just want to point that out. So I see that differently from a parking for any other restaurant, honestly, because we do need spillover parking for City Hall on occasion. And if we're going to pay for it, I want people to know about it. So I guess those are my comments, and I just want to say, every time I look at this project, I get excited. There's so many things that are innovative and beautiful and exciting about it, and especially the opportunity it creates to fix some of the transportation issues around this part. I think it'll be central to revitalizing this, is sort of seeing, here's City Hall, here's the heart of Edina, and making this a really exciting area. So thanks to everybody, but thanks for your answers.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. I'm thinking that either Nick Anhut or Jay Lindgren, our legal advisor, this public parking issue, you know, I know that there, in some cities that regularly use TIF, and I'm thinking of our neighbor to the south, I think parking is just a regular consideration for the use of TIF. I'm thinking of the Mall of America, for example, which is a private development. But all of that public parking, as I understand it, was put in by the city of Bloomington using tax increment financing because they wanted to see this, I'll call it brownfield development, occur. So I wonder if you could comment on this whole parking issue, just generally what you're seeing across the metro and how different cities approach this, some of which are our neighbors. Either one of you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I can try that again. Jay Lindgren with Dorsey & Whitney Law Firm, Special Counsel to the City and the HRA on economic development issues. I would say that first and foremost on the, dozens or hundreds of tax increment projects I've worked on, parking is primarily the issue that is solved. I mean, that is oftentimes what we are talking about, and oftentimes in most tax increment deals, it's because of the need for expensive structured parking. So first of all, parking is always in the mix on tax increment. From the standpoint of public parking, I mean, you're correct that tax increment was a major funding source for the parking available at the Mall of America. In Edina, when we have worked on things and require public parking that goes beyond the level of normal parking that would be required to meet a land use requirement, like to meet your customers' needs, what we do is we require that an easement be recorded against the land that dedicates a portion of that to the public in perpetuity. And so that's one distinction here, again, to advise, not to sell, but it's different than the customer parking where somebody else could pull up and park there and then walk across to City Hall. We actually would have a legal document that says the public has the right to park there. So, Mr. Chair, I don't know if that addresses your concerns or your question, but I draw those distinctions.
It's very helpful, I think. Is that somewhat akin to what happened down at Centennial Lakes years ago, where you see people parking, going to restaurants, going to Whole Foods, but the public gets to use those parking spaces too to go and walk around the park or to enjoy some of those amenities?
If I can, Mr. Chair, that does predate me, even though the color of my beard is so white. But yes, I think that is true, is that what you would find is that structured parking as well as surface parking there has both the right for the businesses to use it, but also the public to use it to go to the park. Mm-hmm. And so we create a shared public parking easement, which for these 29 spaces would be the same kind of document that if you tell us to come back to you with a negotiated redevelopment agreement, we would actually have as an attachment to that document the form of the public parking easement.
All right. I thought Manager Neuendorf did a good job of addressing the reason for the leveling of the playing field relative to demolition costs and site improvement costs. But I'm interested in your observations as well. I think if we had, hang on to that microphone. I got a couple more for you. If we had former council member Fisher here, who does a lot of work on TIF, he would say that, I think he'd basically parrot what Manager Neuendorf said, is that when developers have a choice of going to greenfield or brownfield, brownfields are inherently disadvantaged, or places that are fully developed. And now you're talking about redevelopment. The reason that there are TIF eligible costs, such as demolition costs and site improvement costs or stormwater management costs, are there is to kind of level that playing field between infill, as Commissioner Jackson calls it, cities that are doing infill and cities that are still doing development on green space. So I would be interested in your comments on that too, how that came to be and why, and your observations about why that's a legitimate TIF expense.
I know you want to end your meeting in a half an hour, so I'll try not to take the full half hour. I'm just kidding. It's one of my favorite topics, though. But just very quickly, Mr. Chair, seriously, your language of the word level the playing field, that is exactly what I think about tax increment is about. And I thought Commissioner Jackson did a very good job of talking about the impacts that can exist on a community. But to the point of I guess if your question is why is that being done, is what I'm trying to say is this: the law allows that level of the playing field to occur for a very wide host of costs related to that. So a public body like yourself can decide that you can reimburse for a very wide range of costs in order to have that infill development occur. One of the things you've done as policymakers is narrow that very much. And even though you're sitting there having a conversation about, what is public benefit and so forth, in some ways I see this project as one of the lowest amount of tax increment, at least on the ones that I've worked over several years, compared to the amount of benefit. Again, I don't want to debate what public benefit is, but this is a $5 million TIF note on an $85 million project using 15 years of the district as opposed to 26, and then we already talked about generating some 11 to 15 or whatever $million for other public improvements that we can fit within. In other words, this is from a use of tax increment to level the playing field. It kind of has much more benefit than most TIF districts do in some ways. So, Mr. Chair, that's kind of a rambling answer. I don't know.
No, that's very, I think, very helpful.
It's different. It's structured a little bit differently than ones that I've had the opportunity to work on for you. But in some ways, I can see where it yields even greater benefit because it doesn't require all the tax increment. Many projects require all the tax increment to fill the gap.
Very good, thank you. Did that prompt any questions from other commissioners okay, all right, good. Thank you, Mr. Lindgren. Manager Newdorf, did that prompt anything further that you wanted to add?
No, I think that covers it. We'd be looking for your approval of these terms and authorization for us to work with Jay and others to get a full redevelopment contract prepared. That would be brought back to you at a future date. It would have all the gory detail, probably a couple hundred pages of exhibits and legalese and easements, but with your authorization, we're ready to proceed to that step.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, for me, well, and I thought Commissioner Anderson raised an issue that's been kind of lingering for me too, is this land cost issue. But when I look at the overall benefits of the TIF, I think that were really well explained by our legal counsel advisor on this, Jay Lindgren. Talk about turning a $3 million assessed market value property into an $80+ million property, really over 15 years. Capturing that 1,800% increase in value by still maintaining the sort of base increment for the school district and the county, but then seeing them enjoy a tremendous benefit when this district expires. For me, there are elements of it that I like more than others or like less than others. But when I think about stormwater improvements, public streets, what Mr. Lindgren said about creating $11 million to do some of the street work we want to do, the affordable housing aspects of it, the land for future public use, all of that, I think my thoughts are consistent with the staff recommendation and our advisors. So I don't know if others have comments as well before I ask for whether there would be a motion to approve the term sheet, and we can do this two ways, I guess. Let's do it this way. Is there a motion to approve the term sheet and authorize the preparation of a complete TIF redevelopment agreement based on the term sheet?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second that for purpose of the vote.
All right, let's go for discussion. Any further comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for raising the issue of affordable housing. This is a really good affordable housing project as well, and I wanted to acknowledge that, so thank you.
All right, very good. All right, any further discussion? We can do this by roll call. Do we need all three of us, or can we have a majority, simple majority? Mr. Kendall?
Mr. Chair, the rules for this meeting would be 2 out of 3. It's the majority of votes cast.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, all those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Carried. All right, thank you for your good work. It was a good dialogue. All right, and then we're on, Manager Newendorf, you are doing a lot of work this morning.
I'll be here a long time this morning.
On to the next one.
So a lot of these are related, and I'll just keep my remarks very brief. The next resolution, 2021-08, is a follow-up to the action you just took, and that is to recommend and call for a public hearing to consider the creation of this tax increment district. So this is the first step in the process, is to ask the city council to schedule a public hearing at a future date. Staff recommends that this resolution be approved.
All right, questions for Manager Newendorf on Resolution 2021-08? All right, is there a motion to approve Resolution 2021-08, which calls for a public hearing on the proposed modifications to the redevelopment plan for the Southeast Edina redevelopment project area in the Eden-Wilson tax increment financing district?
So moved. Oh, second.
Second motion, second. Motion member Anderson, second member Jackson. And any further discussion? All those in favor of the resolution is 2021-08. Passage of that resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. And next on to 2021-09, which is a potential adoption of the modifications of the tax increment financing plan for the Southdale 2 tax increment financing district. And Manager Newendorf, you have this matter as well.
Yes, this one is a completely separate topic. So as you recall, the Southdale 2 TIF district was created back in 2011, nearly 10 years ago. Over the years, we've made 3 other minor modifications to that district. We're here this morning asking for approval on modification number 4. This change reflects recent changes in state statute that address the budget of that TIF district. So the resolution would approve, it would approve that budget change, and that is the only change. The boundaries don't change, the project doesn't change, the scope doesn't change, and this is one of those districts, it will decertify at the end of this year. So that decertification also will not change. So staff recommends approval of resolution 2021-09.
Questions for Manager Newendorf on the staff recommendation on approval of resolution 2021-09?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So just
Commissioner.
to confirm, this is to conform with the changes to state law. It doesn't change anything operationally, really, that's happening?
That's correct. It doesn't, there's no operational changes. A few years ago, the city did receive special legislation to allow some of these funds to be used for affordable housing. So as this district starts to wind down, we're seeing what the final days look like. With this change, we think we can capture a few more dollars to help support more affordable housing. So that's the reason that we're making this change this morning.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Commissioner, would you care to make a motion to adopt a resolution?
So moved.
All right.
Second?
Thank you. We had a motion and a second to adopt resolution 2021-09, which would adopt modifications of the tax increment financing plan for the Southdale 2 tax increment financing district. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion as stated and the adoption of resolution 2021-09 say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Manager Newendorf, what do we have to be concerned about in terms of year end and making plans for how to best use those funds for the benefit of the taxpayers of the city of Edina?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we're getting to that point. So as this district winds down, starting next year in January, that new tax base that's been created will spill over to all the taxing agencies. So that's a big deal. I mean, the level of investment there has been, depending on how you do the math, between $500 million and maybe $750 million of new growth on top of the old growth that was there. So there is some tremendous change and impact to benefit everybody. But as we wind down, you can expect us to return probably in September, probably late September, with the recommendation of how to wind down those funds in that district. There are some changes in state law recently that provide a little bit more flexibility than we had last year. So we're still working with our advisors to make sure that we follow the law, but looking at how those dollars can best be invested to the greater good. So we'll be back in about a month to talk about that in detail.
All right, very good. Thank you. What do you anticipate the amount of money will be in there at the end of the year that we need to worry about or think about how to use?
It's in the range of $6 to $8 million.
All right, very good. Thank you. Let's move on to item D, which is 5146 Eden Avenue redevelopment planning. And you want a little guidance there on a particular matter.
Yes, thank you. This morning, Dave Anderson with Franchu is in the audience with us. I've been working with the Franchu companies for a few months, working with them to tap into their commercial real estate expertise. And what we're working with them on at the moment is that centerpiece on the old public works site. We've focused on having a hospitality user, a restaurant, a dining user, and we're getting ready to go to the market and see who's out there, who's available, and who's capable. United Properties, meanwhile, still has strong interest to acquire the southern portion of the site for a senior cooperative housing project. But at the moment, we want to focus on the middle so that we can bring to you a full package. Hopefully by the end of October, we can start to see how that entire site shapes up. We just wanted to give you an update this morning, and if we're off base, please let us know. If we're going in the right direction, let us know that as well. And we're planning on going out to the market next week, so it's a very timely conversation. The concept is the same as we've looked at for this last few months, creating a vibrant space that has a hospitality or a restaurant, dining type opportunity, but one that embraces the indoors and the outdoors, one that has activities, not just dining, not just drinking, but other activities. Could be pickleball, could be shuffleboard, could be bocce, could be any number of things. We'll leave that to the creatives out there that are actually doing it. So the site plan generally is the same as it was a few weeks ago or a few months ago. You've seen these renderings before, they're in your packet. These are just initial concepts just to get the conversation started. But here's kind of the meat, what we will be seeking. We'll be looking at restaurant, dining, or hospitality users that provide an all-season format, not just a summertime concession stand, but a year-round place. We'd have that indoor and outdoor dining, also indoor and outdoor activities. We've shown lawn games, but there's so many different types of things you can do. The other key thing that we'll be seeking information on is the type of transaction that these businesses would be seeking. In the past, this body, the HRA board, has said that we're open to pretty much any type of transaction as long as we get that outcome, that vibrant place that we're looking for. So there's some businesses that can only do a deal with a land lease, where they are the tenant, we are the landlord. So that's an option. There's others that can do the deal, but it's a build to suit. So we're not just the landlord, we also own the building that houses them, not just the land. Very different type of contract, but something that might be out there. And then there's others that can only do the project if they own the land. So at this point, we're leaving all three options on the table. And again, if we can achieve that end goal in either one of these models, I think it's worth considering. If you have any concerns, please let us know. And then for the outreach strategy, Franchu will essentially serve as the HRA's broker for this piece of the site. They've got much deeper outreach into the commercial real estate world than staff does. The intention is to contact groups that operate at a local and regional level primarily, but also some that might operate on a national scale. So this could be a local restaurateur, it could be a local restaurant group, it could be a tap room, a distillery. There's other groups like Pinstripes over by Centennial Lakes. They're an example of a national. Groups like that might be worth talking to. There's other groups that are larger, the Dave & Buster's in Southdale. We probably would not be contacting them or their peers. That's a massive model. The parking requirement, the space requirement, we just don't have it here. So we want to focus on the types of users that have shown success in the past. We don't want to be a first-time experiment for somebody. We want to tap into someone's creative energy and their success and promote something amazing on this site. And we're getting ready to run hard. So the information will be made available next week. We'll be looking at a mid-September deadline to ask folks to get back to us. They'll get back to Franchu. And then we'll start to vet those for you. In mid-October, we expect to bring a group of folks that are interested in front of the HRA to interview and try to sell you on what they have to offer. And that should put us in a position in late October for this group to make a selection. Out of the groups that are available and capable and excited, we will need to pick one. And there's a lot of details in that, the type of transaction, the rates, the prices, the outcomes, the schedule. But by the end of the year, we hope to execute agreements, contracts with the preferred group. And that should also align with the contract to sell the southern portion with the T United Properties. So it'll be a busy schedule. You'll be hearing from me a lot this fall. But before we go to market, we wanted to get your input. If we're missing anything, let us know. If we're off base, let us know. And with that, both Dave and I are available for your questions.
Good, thank you for that presentation. Commissioner Jackson, any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a couple of things that are not in this request for expressions of interest that I hope that you'll add. You've got the pictures of the land and the concepts, but I would like to see in the beginning so that people have a sense of the scale of this, just a description of the parcel itself, that I believe it's 3.3 acres, and just a sentence that says this is a site that's 3.3 acres. It will be shared with a housing facility, so we're looking at approximately half, or just something really vague because we don't want to have to tie that down immediately, but to give potential bidders an idea of the space that they're working with. So that's one thing I would like to see that at the beginning, so they're already thinking to scale. And then on this part 2E, I think I would like to have just a sentence that it's up to negotiation as to who will own and operate the green space. So that they know, I think the idea is that if they're a restaurateur, they don't want to have to be a gardener as well. So that's open to negotiation. We don't want to shut down ideas because they don't want to have to deal with terrace gardens or something like that. So I'd like to make that clear. One thing, after I spoke with you briefly yesterday, I just want to make it clear that we're not going to cannibalize our existing businesses, that we want something that's innovative and new here and not another drive-through coffee place. So just as an example. So I hope that we sort of eliminate anything would compete with the existing businesses there. And then finally, at the risk of wordsmithing, and I apologize, under 2A and B, we say the restaurant and the restaurant's business, if we could have restaurant/dining/hospitality or something like that, because in your presentation, that's how it's worded, and we worded that otherwise. So again, keeping people's imaginations alive and really looking at possibilities without narrowing it prematurely. So, those are my comments.
All right, good. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you. I don't want to drill down too far, get real specific. It's in, I mean, I think would be premature. But I want to reflect Commissioner Jackson's comment really about site allocation visually, and I know that we're not done here. But visually, this looks to me to be about 60-40. And, 62-38, 55-45, it really isn't as critical as how the space is designed and what's used. And to that end, the location of any hospitality venue it just needs to be adjacent to parking or have parking readily available. I think that that's going to determine usage and how people flow through that site and come into it. And so that just, so the location, now if I jump down, and I understand that this is a very preliminary concept, if I jump down to the kind of the sketch of the potential use of that site, I don't know how that would work in terms of parking or access to what's indicated here as a restaurant, but that restaurant is only indicated at like 2,400 feet, which I would think would limit who you might consider. And so that's something to consider going forward. And the location of it, of course, would be something to consider going forward. We've got a bridge coming across on the far north side of that site. And yet the entertainment venue and the use of the site itself is somewhat removed from that, although it is adjacent to the parking as indicated on that sketch. Now, again, I know this is not the end all. However, I just want to bring that forward, that the location of that is going to determine it. And then I don't know if we're at the right place here. The transaction models that you have noted. To me, the land lease kind of depends on the tenant. I don't think many would be interested in 2,600 feet, but possibly. I'm not sure what that operation would look like, but it would be small, and it wouldn't necessarily be a gathering point. If Commissioner Staunton were here, I think he'd be talking about that probably more eloquently than I might. But in terms of a gathering point and a community asset, it's just that's going to be important, what the flow of that is. So the land lease would be a potential, but it seems to me that we have to figure that out. Building to suit certainly creates the most control on the part of the city. You can go to a triple net lease there, but it does create liability. It creates liability because restaurants fail. They just, over the course of time. I don't think you can plug anything in anywhere and say, hey, this is good for 20 years. I'm not sure. And even then, we're going to be there longer than 20 years. So building to suit means that you do have to create kind of a generic building that can adapt itself to other models or other possibilities in the future. We've seen them come and go. A sale of that site, it's to me, I think then we're just essentially creating a commercial site with a multifaceted park, and that begins to get out of the control, which means then it gets out of the control of the community. And so going forward, it just seems like, for me anyway, the top two have the most possibilities, and then the specifics of that probably come into play. Did you want to talk about, or we're going to go on to that next? Okay, good, thank you.
All right, good. Yeah, I think you're on the right track generally. You've got good comments from my fellow commissioners. How the site gets used, I think, or what the transaction looks like, I want to keep an open mind on that. I think some interesting issues have been raised in terms of long-term control of that portion of the site by the city. That would mean that the sale would be at the bottom of the preferred methodologies, but I'm willing to keep an open mind on that because there's always an option, right of first refusal that you can attach to it. So I guess I'd like to see what the possibilities are, match them with the type of transaction required, and then make a decision on that. I think what we're going to find is, from what I'm hearing, is that no one's going to build a 6,000 square foot restaurant anymore. And so that the fact that it may be a smaller restaurant with a bigger outdoor area for activities, I think that we might be ahead of the curve on that. But I'm just, some cities, even Bloomington to the south, requires some minimal size on restaurants, and they're just not, from what I'm hearing, is they're just not seeing people coming forward with big restaurant footprints anymore. So that's something we'll have to keep in mind too as we assess this. So I think you're heading in generally a good direction, and I think that's probably all you need for now on that.
Yes, thanks. That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for being here this morning. All right, on to the potential relationship with Franchu Companies, the real estate agreement, item E.
Yeah, so this item, it dovetails into that last conversation as well. So we entered into an engagement letter with Franchu and United Properties last month, but now as we start getting a little bit more serious about work to be done and decisions to be made, we have a broker real estate agreement with you, or in front of you this morning in your packet. This has been prepared jointly by Franchu and the city. It's been reviewed by our city attorney. The rates are customary and normal, and we'd recommend that it be approved and implemented.
All right, good. I think Commissioner Anderson had some questions on it, and I think Commissioner Jackson already made her points on the agreement. So go back to Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I look at this thing and I say 4% in the ballpark. That's the fee that's being charged, and that I think is right in there. I guess the only question that I would have and would raise an objection to is that there's a kind of a retainer fee in there, a monthly fee, if the agreement expires, or if there were any reason to cancel it. It could be on the part of the broker, could be on the part of the city. And those things do come up. They can. So I do question that. I think that's a significant amount, and especially with expiration. With expiration of a listing agreement of any kind for a service agreement, it would be unusual to compensate. We expect good effort, and frankly, I expect this to be successful. But I want to question that amount. Other than that, looks fine to me.
Your comments on Commissioner Anderson's concerns?
That was something that Franchu recommended we include, and maybe Mr. Anderson can respond better than myself. I think part of the reason we included it and why I'm agreeable to it is that we've been talking about the site for 10 years, and we haven't made a decision yet. We're asking Franchu to do a lot of work in a very short amount of time. We're optimistic that we will be able to make a decision, but in the event that we can't, they want to be compensated for all their time they're going to put in over the next 2 months. So that's why I'm agreeable to it. It seems like a fair thing to do. The intention is not to let that linger for 12 months and then write them a big payout at the end. I think we'll know by the end of October, I think we'll know if we're moving forward or not. Again, I'm optimistic we will move forward. I think we're going to have some great, amazing choices in front of us. But that provision does not cause me any heartburn.
All right. Wouldn't the agreement have a normal expiration anyway? I mean, if they get the job done, the agreement's going to expire. So I'm just concerned a little bit about how that's phrased. I mean, I know they're not waiving any other rights under the agreement, but maybe Member Anderson or Mr. Anderson could talk about this a little bit. They're going to get a 4% commission. Commissioner Anderson, who's in this business, thinks that seems reasonable. So if there's a closing, this agreement's going to expire, right?
Correct.
And they're going to have been paid that 4%.
Correct.
I just want to make sure that at closing, there isn't a request for $7,500 a month for the months that they worked on top of the commission.
Correct. Yeah, it is not additive. That would be only if we cancel early, or if we get to a point where we just don't make a decision. And I mean, that would be unusual. In the past, sometimes we've made a decision not to make a decision or not to proceed, but we've done it expeditiously. I think the expiration language here would be in case we never got back to them for 12 months.
Yeah, well, maybe, Mr. Kendall, you could make it clear that if Roundshoe earns its commission, there's no other monies due.
I could do that, Mr. Chair. I raised the same question about if it expires in normal course after a full year, is the city going to owe $7,500 per month? So that was a concern of mine. I can modify the language to clarify that if that's what the HRA would like.
All right. Mr. Anderson, you comfortable with that?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, I'll let you guys worry about that. The devil in the details part. You've had some good points raised here by commissioners. All right, with that understanding that staff is going to rework this contract a bit, is there a motion to approve the real estate services agreement with Roundshoe Inc. to represent the HRA in a potential hospitality-related transaction?
So moved.
On the northern portion of the site. Thank you,
Second.
Commissioner. And Commissioner Jackson, thanks for the second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion stated say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And now we're on to the theater here, right at the 9 o'clock hour, but I think we can try to hear what you have to say and give that some thought. So go ahead.
Great, yes, thank you. So in your packet, there was a staff memo with some information about the history and the current status of the theater. I won't go through that in detail, but obviously the theater's been closed since the pandemic started in March of 2020. The previous tenant walked away from the property, and when they left, they took most of the equipment and some other things as well. The property is locally owned. It is not available for sale. Staff has received many phone calls, emails, and inquiries about a concern about the site being demolished or sold for some other nefarious reason. The owner assures us it is not for sale. They want to reopen it as a theater, and in fact, they're in active conversations with 3 different groups. Each group is excited, they're capable, they're experienced, and each has said it takes a lot of dollars to update that theater and reopen it. Between $1 million and $1.5 million is the easy estimate based on what they know today. It could be higher than that. And they've reached out to me to see if the city can help them get reopened with some financial assistance. In my opinion, the theater is an essential element of the 50th and France district. It's a destination that is desirable not only to Edina residents, but residents and customers throughout the metro area. So I certainly support getting involved to some degree. In my staff report, I've got 3 recommendations, and I'd love your discussion. Don't need any action this morning, but as we continue to have conversation, it'd be very helpful to know what you're thinking, what your preferences are. So the first item is just a reminder that this is a privately owned facility, so the owner makes the decision about who their tenant is. 2 of the folks she's working with are typical for-profit theater operators. They operate arts-related theaters. It's not just the big Star is Born type of blockbuster, but it's art, it's international, it's independent. The third is a nonprofit. The Minneapolis-St. Paul Film Society is the third one. They do very similar programming, a little bit more community-based, but their business model is completely different. So while it's the owner's decision as far as who she leases to, I believe that if we're going to provide some assistance, we get to voice our preferences or concerns. The first funding source we'd recommend is some of that federal money, the ARPA grant funding. And this will come to you later in September, sitting as a city council. But we've earmarked about $200,000 of those funds as targeted business assistance to businesses that have been economically impacted by the pandemic. In this case, the landlord has not been paid for a year and a half. Utilities haven't been paid. They have paid their taxes. But there's a lot of distress in the current situation. So we think that money could be added to help bring things up to at least to a level playing field. I'd also recommend that some level of reimbursement be provided for the tenants. There's a lot of capital improvement that's necessary. At this point, I don't have specifics, but I would estimate that the range of requests could be anywhere from $50,000 to $500,000. If there's a end of the range that you like or don't like, it'd be helpful to know that. And then the fourth recommendation is about some of the infrastructure that serves the theater. About 6 years ago, the city replaced about half of the sidewalks in that area, and we assess that cost to the businesses. It goes on their tax bill. It's time for the other half to be replaced. I have strong concerns that adding another special assessment on top of the old special assessment coming out of a pandemic is going to not help the situation. So I'm recommending that we use some tax increment dollars or some other funds available to the HRA to go ahead and get those sidewalks up to date. That's a project we can do next year. The cost is estimated to be about $400,000. But I'd recommend that we pursue that direction. So those are the four big items. I'm happy to hear your conversation, and we seek your guidance before we enter into any serious conversations or negotiations with either the tenant or the landlord.
Commissioner Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, the ARPA funds. I can't think of any better use of our ARPA funds. This is the public concern over the loss of the Edina Theater is visceral. So I really think that is a very popular use of those funds. So I think that's a great idea. As we're talking about this stuff, I would like to see when whoever it's going, whether it's the owner or the operator is going to come forward for public funds, I'd like to see the economic impact of their proposal. So looking at the Minneapolis Film Festival bringing 85,000 people, I mean, that's a pretty exciting number. But I'm also seeing sort of a hint in Ms. Feeney's presentation that there might be some operating support requested. If the rent here is much higher than where they are currently, you know, I would want to see some really hard numbers about the benefit to the 50th and France area, and maybe even Grandview, but specifically in that area, and the feedback from the 50th and France Association on what it means to them to have different types of operations coming in. So to the extent that we give money, I want to make sure that we're getting the maximum economic impact out of that, and also feedback from our existing businesses. And I think certainly the idea of upgrading it and putting some money into new seats and renovations is an excellent idea. The last time I was there, I was like, wow, that was a great movie in a really dumpy setting. So I think if we do that, that'll really revitalize the business itself. And I think the public would like that too, more willing to go there. And again, it's something tangible you can see. We helped pay for this, and this is beautiful. But I think going forward, these are all good recommendations, but I really want to see the economic impact of what we're paying for as we go forward. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you. I would reflect some of Commissioner Jackson's statements, but also add that I think that location, its utilization over the course of time is iconic in our town. It's really part of the history. I think it is somewhat symbolizes 50th in France. People talk about that, think about that. Many have been customers in that theater. Been a lot of great times associated with it. It would be, in a perfect world, it'd be ideal to see it redone and going forward. And I do think that business has been impacted dramatically by COVID and the shutdown. And the operators seem to strip the property out on the way out the door. That's probably disappointing to the owner. In any event, the question comes, of course, is what's our role in that?
and to what degree can we do it, and the utilization of the space. I think that part of your notes indicated that ticket receipts there were declining prior to COVID significantly. It could be the what's showing there and the choice of films and the operator itself. But I guess that it just comes up like what actually should be occurring in there. I mean, do you continue in its current usage? Is there a mixed use possibility there? I think it's the Varsity, I'm not sure, over on at the University of Minnesota campus has, they kind of redid that space and used it as an event center. Not saying, not up to me, I'm not saying that that's that should happen there. It's clearly up to the owner, the type of operation that she would like to see there. But I just think that we evaluate it, but retention of it and helping that business out, yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. So, a couple of things come to mind for me, and I've been thinking about this since I think Channel 5 did that story. We stood down in front of the Edina Theater, and I looked up and realized the sign needed a restoration work, and I think you've applied for a grant from the State Historical Society for redoing that signage. As I think Member Anderson said, it's an iconic sort of symbol for our town, but it's also a really important element to the business district. And I think even the broader community, people like coming there from all over the metro, at least historically, for a meal and a film. And it was a place they really enjoyed coming to, and I think a lot of our businesses benefited from it. So now she's got several different possibilities here, and I don't know where you were with the conversation with the film producer. Did you ever talk to him, the United Properties lead?
There's several different conversations happening, yes, and we did follow up on that, and that's still in process.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of folks in Edina that are passionate about this space, as well as folks in the overall Twin Cities.
Sure, and understandably so, and I'm right in there with them. But what I wonder about is what's our role, if any, in influencing the decision of the owner on who they're going to go with, and based upon the fact that we may make a substantial investment as a community in a private asset. I mean, we've made small grants to small businesses. Mm-hmm. None of them have exceeded $10,000, I don't think. And here we're facing a prospect of $1 million to $1.5 million investment. So my question would be, how do we protect our community interests if we're going to make that kind of investment? And it's difficult to sit here this morning and talk to you about how we're going to do that, because we don't know what the proposals are yet. But I think if you go back and tell the owner and prospective tenants that our city is interested in figuring out a way to help some way, somehow, but we're going to want to make sure that our community interests are protected with that significant potentially seven-figure investment, then that's got to be factored in here. Mm-hmm. And then what role you might play on influencing the decision of the owner herself, and maybe this HRA on, coming back to us with what she's proposing. And because I think we do have a community interest to protect here, separate and aside from us all wanting the same thing, that is the perpetuation of that theater down there as a symbol of our community and as a draw to the 50th and France area as part of their overall economic development strategy. So those are my thoughts, but I'm with you so far. I just don't think we can be more specific about whether we're going to provide ARPA funding. It's nice to know we've got some resources available, some potential pots we can draw from. And I think we're all comfortable with that. You heard everybody say that this morning in their own way. So is that enough for you to work with?
Yes, this is very helpful. So thank you for the discussion and the guidance. So I will be meeting with the owner later today, and I'll be encouraging her to start focusing on which tenant makes the most sense, and then figure out the benefit to the community. So we'll be back to talk more about this one in September or October as well.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And Ms. Feeney, thanks for coming in this morning. getting up and for your presentation. It was helpful to the discussion. So, okay. All right. Commissioners have anything else that they want to talk about? Any commissioner comments? Generally? All right. And then executive director comments? You've got one topic you want to cover.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I have two. One,
Okay.
Mr. Neuendorf is just laid out here, is that we do have a need for an upcoming closed session discussion with the council to talk about a real estate, potential real estate sale at 5146, at least a partial sale of that site. So we're going to be looking at your calendars to see when we can put that closed session together. That is one of the exemptions in the open meetings law, is for public bodies to talk about real estate sales. So we will talk about that with you. That kind of leads to a second question, though, and that's around meeting times and dates. We've had some conflicts lately with schedules of HRA commissioners about our Thursday morning time slot. And we have talked about this a few times before, about what time and date works well. I think in terms of a reminder to the HRA, the reason that we started these morning meetings was that we were appending HRA meetings to the end of council meetings, and they were getting very long, and it was getting difficult to sustain motivation, momentum, energy levels when we were starting an HRA meeting at 11:30 or midnight, let alone that members of the public couldn't really participate meaningfully at that time of night. So that's why we moved to this time frame. However, if this isn't working very well for the group, I think we will start the process of kind of asking you when we might, how we might do this differently going forward. One meeting in particular that's coming up is our next HRA meeting that for a number of reasons got pushed to Friday, September 10th, because our council meeting is a very rare Thursday night council meeting on Thursday the 9th. We already know that two members can't make the meeting, so we'll have a 3-member HRA. But I do wonder whether you want to potentially move the items that might be on that agenda to the 23rd of September, which would be a regular HRA meeting that day, and cancel that meeting on September 10th.
Is there any time element involved?
I don't know, Mr. Neuendorf, do you know that you're going to have a timeline critical item for the 10th? Do you know right now? I'm guessing maybe you don't.
I think we have I think there's a resolution for a TIF district.
Okay, so
I think for the Eden Wilson. So I can double check.
Okay. And Ms. Hawkinson, I don't know if you've got anything kind of mission critical for that day.
I myself cannot attend that meeting.
Okay. So if that's an action that we could take very briefly at the council meeting the night before, we might move that item up and cancel that meeting on Friday the 10th.
And we'll have a full council for the meeting on the
We will have
Thursday.
we'll have, I think, is that right? Well, we'll have 4 that night, right?
Okay.
At the council meeting. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about that briefly. I know it's a discussion we've been having both as a group and individually, and we will start the process as we going forward as to how we want to handle HRA meetings in the future, especially in 2022. We'll present to you kind of your full schedule for 2022 in December, so just a few months from now.
What's the extent of the regular council agenda for that Thursday night? How long?
I don't know yet.
We don't know
No.
yet? Okay.
We'll figure that out early next week.
I guess personally, I'd rather have 4 than 3. And so if we can move those HRA items into the city council meeting,
Okay.
let's just handle it that night with 4. And then cancel the meeting the next morning. And
That'll be the,
yeah. Or if you think from a staff standpoint, things can be deferred until the 23rd.
we'll try that option first, and if we can't, we'll append them to the evening of September 9th, but we'll move forward with sort of the process of closing or canceling that September 10th meeting.
Okay.
And that's all I have.
All right. Anything further? Got a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
A motion and a second to adjourn. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried? We stand adjourned.